Mark Cox Show on FM News Talk 97.1, 98.7, AM 1490, and 97.1talk.com.
I took an action that I can't take back. And I'm not proud of what happened. I should not have responded in the way that I did. And for that, I'm sorry. I should not have treated that reporter that way. And for that, I'm sorry, Mr. Ben Jacobs.
That was Congressman now, Greg Gianforte, who got elected about 24 hours out from this dust-up with a British reporter. He apologized for it, but he won anyway. Jared Halperin of Fox News Radio, that's one of the stories he's covering today. Jared, he was ahead in the polls before this incident happened, correct?
He was, and it was always expected to win. I mean, one of the reasons that this race, this special election, got so much attention is for the same reason some of these other special elections are, and it's really to get, I think, a bellwether sense of where the primaries might be headed. What are voters motivated by in the early days of the Trump administration? This is a state, Montana, that the president won by about 20 points. Obviously, this House race was much closer, was expected to be much closer than that, and it was. So that's why it had the attention that it had. You had in Gianforte a guy who really had embraced, in many respects, the president's style. He's a business guy. Not really a career politician, though did run for governor unsuccessfully, and trumpeted some of the same types of appeal, and I think that's why this race got the type of attention that it did. Ben Jacobs is not British, by the way; he's an American reporter. He works for the Guardian, which is a British outlet, but he's I think from this area. I don't know him well, but he doesn't have a British accent, and that's why it got the attention that it got. And I certainly this being charged with assault is unusual on election eve. But a lot of folks in Montana had already voted, and that's also one of the things that we've seen, not just in this race, but in a lot of races. Remember, in the presidential race, when that Access Hollywood tape came out of the president, a lot of people, and we talked about it then, had already voted, because there's early voting, there's absentee voting, and that is becoming more and more popular, particularly in big rural states where you have that opportunity. Yeah, that's a good point. In this particular case, he's charged with a misdemeanor, correct? This is nothing that is going to follow him into Congress and prevent him from serving, correct? Unlikely that it would. Well, it could follow him in the Congress. I mean, I think he could be sentenced to 6 months in jail. Oh, wow. I believe that's what the citation said. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I believe that's the case. The reason it was a misdemeanor and not a felony, according to the sheriff, is it was based on the extent of the injuries to the reporter. Did not, I guess, fall into the felony category. It is a question as to whether there's really nothing the House can do to prevent him from being seated. There's a Supreme Court case from a few decades ago that kind of makes clear what can prevent a member of Congress from not being seated. That's not to say that he can't be sanctioned once he's here. You don't have to be allowed onto any committees. The Republican conference would not technically have to accept him, although a statement from the office of the House Speaker yesterday indicates that's not going to happen. I think it will be interesting to see how quickly, assuming nothing else comes out of this, right, how quickly this sort of moves beyond. He's not going to be a member of Congress for another few weeks. He's not going to be sworn in until Congress returns from its Memorial Day recess the first week of June. And so a lot of time's going to pass between now and then. Yeah, that's very true. Assuming, of course, nothing else comes out of it. and I say that only because the sheriff has talked about the investigation not being over. Gianforte, I think, still has to appear in court, and so I guess we'll see. But I think by and large, the at-large member of Congress for Montana generally, unless they become a committee chair of some kind, does not get a ton of attention from the D.C. press corps. I imagine the early days he will, and probably will get some questions about the American Health Care Act and CBO scores.
Yeah, he'll probably take those from now on, that's for sure. He'll be an easy mark. He'll be afraid to say no. Speaking of health care, that CBO score came out. Paul Ryan, as I heard him speak yesterday, said that it vindicated their budget numbers, which is all they were looking for, because that meant it could move forward in reconciliation. Is that pretty much the case?
Well, it can, yeah, because reconciliation rules say that a measure can't add to the deficit. This does not do that. The other thing that the Republicans are encouraged by is that this CBO report says that it's going to bring down, after the next couple of years, bring down premiums. Now, what Democrats are pushing is what the rest of that CBO report said, that one of the reasons that premiums will go down is because health insurance providers won't have to cover as much, and that would be the trade-off. From a Senate standpoint, listen, what the American Health Care Act that got through the House looks like is probably going to look an awful lot different when it gets out of the Senate, because the same problems that existed within the House Republican ranks on trying to find common ground, that sort of zone that can win enough conservative support and enough moderate support, exist right now in the Senate, too. And the Senate is probably going to look at some of these CBO scores, and some are going to be startled. They're going to be startled at the 23 million people, in addition, not having insurance. They're going to be startled, I think, by some of the, if they come from a state that may be inclined to ask for waivers. You're still going to have some questions about how Medicaid is treated, the expansion freeze. Mm-hmm. So the same concerns that were in the House are going to happen in the Senate with a much narrower margin for error. You can only lose 2 votes from House Republican, from Senate Republicans.
Yeah, and in truth, on the numbers, one of the criticisms I've heard of it is that of the 24 million, 5 or 6 or 8 million of those, I can't remember the number I read, represent people that didn't get covered under Obamacare either, yep. and a big chunk of the rest of it would come from the Medicaid reform, which would, I'm assuming, lower again the level of income you could have to qualify for it. So those people will then be kicked off of Medicaid, correct?
There are a few things within that figure, and you're right. Part of it has to deal with, if you take away the insurance mandate, there are going to be people that choose not to have health insurance.
Right.
And Speaker Ryan said that yesterday. If the government doesn't tell you you have to buy something, there are going to be people who say, I don't want to buy it. That number also includes, according to the CBO, a few million people who would have such an insurance that they're not even really counting as being insured, because it would not be required to cover major medical expenses. So again, the argument being or the analysis being from the CBO, that there will be less expensive health insurance policies, but the trade-off is there could be much more substantial, in some cases, out-of-pocket medical cost.
Okay.
Now, Republicans say that's part of the market. That's part of solving this bringing down mandates is going to lower premiums. They also, one of the things that Paul Ryan pushed back on is that, one thing that he believes the CBO did not take into account is how some of these state risk pools would work. It's hard to analyze how they would work, since states haven't necessarily decided how they want to set up a high-risk pool, if that's the route they want to go. Remember, a key component to getting the health care bill through the House, the American Health Care Act through the House, was they added additional federal funding to help insulate some of those high-risk pools, to bring down costs for people who may not otherwise get coverage because of pre-existing conditions, in the event that states ask for these waivers to reduce some of the insurance requirements.
Absolutely. That's Jared Halperin with Fox News Radio. Jared, great conversation. Thanks for your time. Have a great Memorial Day weekend.
You too.
All right, take care. To me, that's the bottom line on this healthcare reform, right there, plain and simple. One reason your healthcare premiums exploded is that young, healthy people resented being told they had to buy insurance if they didn't want it. So they would rather have just paid the penalty on their taxes. So that part of the plan didn't work. The other part of the plan that didn't work is that sick people who, the 1%, according to Paul Ryan, 1% of these people who are in this healthcare system account for 24% of the cost of healthcare in this country. 1% equals 24% of the cost of healthcare in this country. If insurers are suddenly required to pay for all of that with no increased premiums, they're making that money up somewhere. If you were a business owner and you were suddenly forced to operate one part of your business at a big loss, you can bet you'd be raising prices on the other side of your business. They're going to make that money back somewhere. They have to. Most of them are not nonprofit organizations. You can demonize healthcare all you want, but they're not nonprofit organizations. Nurses and doctors and everybody have to be paid, and I agree that some of it's inflated, but my goodness, if you pulled that 24% of the cost out of the system because they're able to charge those people a higher premium, but those people are getting a subsidy of some sort from this high-risk pool, that's got to bring premiums down, and the CBO score showed that it would. We could talk more about health care if that's what's on your mind. This Gianforte election, certainly. 314-969-9797, 866-455-9797. Got a call out to Fox with Catherine Herridge. I'm going to try to get her on here today. A little bit of breaking news. Actually, it's kind of confusing. There's a confusing story out on CNN about something James Comey reportedly testified to before Congress that he knew to be fake. And I'm not quite sure why the story isn't that James Comey should be in trouble for knowingly presenting fake information to a congressional hearing. But we'll talk about that as well. 314-969-9797. We're back in just a minute.
This is the Mark Cox Show. Air Comfort Service Heating and Cooling. Weather with Dave Murray.
Couple of spot thunderstorms possible late afternoon. 82 for the high. Tonight, partly cloudy, 65. The weekend, Saturday, more and more clouds.